There is a door, sealed shut, in the frozen wasteland of Russia. Behind it lies a hole that plunges deeper into our planet than any other in history. A hole so deep it spawned a legend, that they drilled into hell itself, that they heard screams, that they found something that forced them to stop. For 24 years, the Soviet Union waged a secret war against the Earth. This is what really happened at the bottom of the world. What if I told you the most terrifying place on Earth isn't a haunted forest or a cursed island? It's a hole. A tiny, sealed hole in the middle of frozen nowhere. For 24 years, the most powerful scientists and engineers of the Soviet Union dedicated their lives, their technology, and their national pride to a single, insane mission, to dig deeper into our planet than any human in history. They called it a scientific mission. The world would later call it the well to hell. This is what they were really looking for. This is what they actually found. And this is the real, terrifying reason they had to stop. The 20th century was defined by a single, all-consuming rivalry: the Cold War. And everyone knows its most famous battlefield, space. The race for the heavens was loud, public, and bathed in glory. But in the shadows, a different, quieter, and far stranger race was beginning. A race not up, but down. While America aimed for the moon, the Soviet Union aimed for something far more ancient and far more mysterious, the very heart of the Earth itself. Their weapon wasn't a rocket. It was a drill. Their battlefield wasn't the sky. It was a frozen, remote wasteland north of the Arctic Circle. And their goal wasn't just to win. It was to prove that Soviet science could conquer a frontier no one could even see. And here's the first stunning twist in this story: the Soviets didn't start this race. The Americans did. In 1958, U.S. scientists launched Project Mohole. Their goal? To be the first to drill through the Earth's thin oceanic crust and reach the Mohorovičić discontinuity, the boundary between the crust and the mantle. They called their ship the Kuss-I. It was a brilliant, daring idea, and it was a spectacular, expensive failure. The technology wasn't ready. The political will evaporated. By 1966, Project Mohole was dead, a footnote in the history of overly ambitious science. In Moscow, scientists didn't see a failure. They saw an opening. Their logic was pure Cold War chess. If the soft capitalists cannot even drill through the thin skin of the ocean, then we, with our superior will and engineering, will drill through the ancient, thick, continental heart of Mother Russia. It was the perfect propaganda coup, disguised as pure science. Every great, obsessive mission needs a mastermind. For the Soviet deep drill, that man was Dr. David Guberman. He wasn't a flashy cosmonaut. He was a meticulous, driven geologist who became the director of the Interdepartmental Scientific Council for the Study of the Earth's Interior and Superdeep Drilling. Say that title 5 times fast. Guberman's vision wasn't just about depth. It was about reading the autobiography of the Earth. He believed the layers of rock were pages in a history book recording billions of years of our planet's life: volcanic fury, ancient oceans, magnetic reversals. All of it was down there waiting to be read. All he had to do was build a machine that could reach down, turn the pages, and survive. So, where do you start digging the deepest hole in human history? You don't just pick spot. You play geological chess. And the Soviets made their master move on the Kola Peninsula. This land is part of the Baltic Shield, one of the oldest, most stable pieces of real estate on the entire planet. Rock here is over 2.5 billion years old. Think of it like this: the Earth's crust is a messy, scrambled book. Mountain ranges like the Alps are pages that have been crumpled, torn, and shoved together by continental collisions. Trying to read a sequence there is impossible. But the Baltic Shield? It's a quiet, pristine page. It's been largely untouched by earthquakes, mountain building, or geological drama for eons. It was, in Guberman's eyes, the perfect, undisturbed manuscript. Drill here, and every layer you pass through tells a clear, sequential story. It was the only place on Earth where the autobiography of the planet could be read, cover to cover. Now the scale of the insanity becomes clear. You have your target. Now you have to build a temple to reach it, in a place where winter lasts 9 months and temperatures plunge to -50. The centerpiece was the Euromash 4E, a 1,200-ton drilling rig that had to be transported piece by piece to the top of the world. It wasn't just a machine, it was a cathedral of engineering. And around this cathedral, they built an entire town from nothing, Zapolyarny, a self-contained, secretive scientific colony housing hundreds of engineers, geologists, and their families. Schools, shops, heating plants, all to service one thing: the whole. This wasn't a temporary camp. This was a permanent outpost of human ambition, established with the grim, unwavering certainty of the Soviet state. They weren't just visiting the abyss. They were moving in next door. By 1970, it was all in place. The target was chosen. The machine was built. The colony was ready. The greatest geological experiment in human history was about to begin. Dr. Guberman and his team stood on the edge of the known world, literally and figuratively. They were about to send a probe into a realm of pure theory, of unimaginable pressure and heat. They had the backing of a superpower. They had the best technology on Earth. They had a clear, pristine geological target. They believed they were prepared for everything. They were wrong. They were prepared for the Earth they thought they knew. They were not prepared for the Earth as it actually was. On May 24, 1970, the drill bit of the Uralmash 4E broke ground. The descent into the autobiography of the Earth had begun. For the first few years, progress was steady, even triumphant. They passed 1 kilometer, then 3, then 5. Each core sample brought up, a solid cylinder of rock, was a new page in the planet's history, greeted in the on-site labs with the excitement of archaeologists unearthing a lost city. But they were not just archaeologists. They were pioneers entering a world governed by physics so extreme they existed only in textbooks. And with every meter, the rules of the world they knew began to bend. To understand why this mission was bordering on science fiction, you have to understand the machine. This was not your grandfather's oil drill. Imagine trying to dig a 12-kilometer deep hole using a strand of spaghetti. That's the first problem, the drill string. A traditional rotating pipe would have twisted itself into a useless knot at these depths. So the Soviets invented a new system. The pipe itself did not rotate. Instead, they pumped a special, dense drilling mud down its center at incredible pressure. This mud did 3 jobs. It cooled the drill bit, it carried the crushed rock cuttings back to the surface, and, most crucially, it acted like a liquid wall, holding the borehole open against the immense pressure trying to crush it shut. At the very bottom, the mud powered a turbo drill, a turbine that spun the cutting head at the end. It was a masterpiece of engineering. But it was a masterpiece trying to operate in hell. By the time they passed 10 kilometers, a staggering depth in itself, the mission transformed from a drilling operation into a siege. First, the pressure. At 12 kilometers down, the pressure is roughly 4,000 times atmospheric pressure. To put that in your gut, it's like having the entire Eiffel Tower balanced on a single postage stamp. The rock itself behaved differently, wanting to flow and close the hole like healing flesh. Then, the heat. The scientists had predicted the temperature based on standard models. They were catastrophically wrong. They expected about 100 degrees Celsius at 10 kilometers. What they got was closer to 180 degrees Celsius, 356 degrees Fahrenheit. The source of this hellish heat? A combination of the planet's natural geothermal gradient and a factor they hadn't fully accounted for, radioactivity. The ancient granite itself contained trace radioactive elements that decayed, cooking the rock from within. The drill heads, made of the hardest tungsten carbide, were designed to crush rock. They were not designed to operate in an oven. They would soften, deform, and sometimes melt outright. Replacing a drill head meant pulling up the entire 12-kilometer string of pipe, a process that could take over 36 hours of non-stop, perilous work. And then, at a depth of around 7 kilometers, they brought up a core sample that would shatter a fundamental geological belief. The sample was wet. It wasn't groundwater that had seeped down. Analysis proved this was mineral-rich water that had been locked in microscopic fractures within the rock itself for possibly billions of years. The entire model of the Earth's deep crust said it should be bone dry, a brittle, crystalline layer. This discovery rewrote the chapter. The deep crust wasn't just solid rock, it was a dynamic, hydrated layer. They had, in effect, found a trapped, ancient ocean under the Earth. But the true mind-bender came from samples even deeper. Embedded within rock that was dated to be 2.7 billion years old, pulled from over 6 kilometers down, geologists found fossils. Not dinosaur bones, but the delicate, microscopic remains of 24 different species of ancient marine plankton. Let that sink in. This basement rock was not some primordial, volcanic foundation. It was an ancient seafloor, a shallow, sunlit ocean from a time before multicellular life existed that had been buried, cooked under immense pressure and heat, and transformed. Then, over eons of continental movement, it had been shoved deeper than the deepest ocean trench. The rock itself had a memory, and it remembered being at the surface. Perhaps the most humbling discovery was one of absence. For decades, a rule in geology was as solid as the rock itself, the Conrad discontinuity. This was the theorized boundary, about 7 kilometers down, where the familiar granite of the continental crust suddenly ended, and a denser layer, thought to be basalt, began. The Kola drill passed through 7 kilometers and found no sharp boundary. No basalt, just more granite, gradually becoming denser and hotter, transitioning into a rock called granulite. The Conrad discontinuity, a cornerstone of Earth science, was a ghost. It simply did not exist. The Soviet drill hadn't just broken through rock, it had broken through a fundamental truth of science. The Earth's crust was not a simple layer cake. It was infinitely more complex. And then there was the unexpected treasure. Scattered throughout the deep cores were micro veins of gold, copper, and nickel. Not in commercially viable amounts, but their mere existence was revolutionary. It proved that the process of mineral deposition, how veins of metal form, wasn't just a shallow crust phenomenon. It was happening in the crushing hot darkness, tens of kilometers deeper than anyone had dreamed. The autobiography of the Earth, they were learning, was not just a history of rock and pressure. It was also a story of hidden, secret wealth, forged in the planet's secret forges. They were reading pages of a book no one had ever seen. But with every page turned, the environment grew more hostile, more alien. The heat was becoming unbearable. The costs were astronomical. And back in the world above, the Soviet Union itself was beginning to crack. The final act of the Kola Superdeep Borehole was not a scientific breakthrough. It was a collision with an absolute, immovable limit and the birth of a legend that would eclipse the truth. By 1989, the Kola drill was in trouble, plagued by heat and technical failures. But in the West, it was about to become a supernatural sensation. It began with Spoof, a Finnish Christian newsletter, Sastia, published a wild, entirely fictional story that Soviet geologists, at a depth of 12 kilometers, had drilled into a hollow cavern. Lowering heat-resistant microphones, they recorded the anguished screams of the damned. Temperatures supposedly soared to 2,000 degrees. They had, the article claimed, discovered literal hell. It was satire, but in the pre-internet age, the story jumped continents. It was picked up and reprinted as fact by American tabloids like the Weekly World News and spread like wildfire on late-night evangelical radio. The Well to Hell was born. The audio you sometimes hear? It's a recycled sound effect from a 1972 Italian horror film, Barren Blood. The story was a perfect storm, the secret of Soviets, a mysterious, impossibly deep hole, and a religious narrative of forbidden knowledge. The truth, a story of rock, heat, and human perseverance, was buried under a more sensational myth. But the real end had nothing to do with demons. It was a brutal confrontation with pure physics. By 1992, the drill had reached its final, record-shattering depth, 12,262 meters, about 7.6 miles. That's where they hit the wall. Not a rock wall, a thermal wall. The temperature at the drill head had now soared to an unimaginable 300 degrees Celsius, 572 degrees Fahrenheit. At this heat, the ancient granite stopped behaving like a solid. It became ductile, a hot, plastic, flowing material. Imagine trying to drill through warm toffee. The hole would keep closing. The drill string would get stuck. On their final attempt, the rock flowed around the bit, snapped the pipe, and left several kilometers of their most advanced equipment buried forever in a tomb of hot stone. They could not advance another centimeter. The Earth itself had declared the race over. And then the final ironic twist. The project wasn't just battling the Earth's heat, it was running on the fuel of a superpower. And that superpower was collapsing. The Soviet Union dissolved in 1991. The state funding that had fed this 24-year obsession vanished almost overnight. The scientific outpost of Zaporizhzhia was now an irrelevant relic. There was no money, no political will, and no way forward. In 1995, with no fanfare, the Kola Superdeep Borehole was officially abandoned. The world's most ambitious geological mission was ended by a combination of impossible heat and simple bankruptcy. So what remains? Not much. The record, yes, is still the deepest artificial point on Earth. Deeper than the Mariana Trench is deep. The drill site is a ghost town. The mighty Euromash rig is likely scrapped. All that's left is a 9-inch wide steel cap rusting in the tundra. If you somehow manage to pry it open and drop a pebble, it would take nearly 50 seconds to hear it hit the bottom of human ambition.
The project was, by its original goal, a failure. They never reached the mantle. They never even came close. But, as a scientific endeavor, it was a revolutionary success. It forced us to rewrite geology textbooks. It revealed a dynamic, wet, fossil-bearing, deep crust we never knew existed. It proved our models were guesses. The real treasure wasn't gold. It was knowledge. And that knowledge came with a profound lesson in humility. The Kola Superdeep Borehole stretches an astonishing 12 kilometers straight down. But to reach the Earth's mantle, you'd need to go down 30 kilometers. To reach the outer core, 2,900 kilometers. The inner core, 5,100 kilometers. The Soviets drilled just 0.2% of the way to the center of our own planet. We have sent probes beyond our solar system. We have mapped the afterglow of the Big Bang. But we cannot conquer the ground beneath our feet. The ultimate limit isn't in the stars. It's here. It's heat and pressure. The very forces that forge the Earth are the same forces that tell us, definitively, you shall not pass. Pass. The story of the Kola Superdeep Borehole is the story of two kinds of hell. The fictional one, a pit of fire and demons that never existed. And the real one, a realm of crushing, silent, impossible heat that very much does. It's a monument not to what we found, but to how far we're willing to go to look. A permanent reminder that for all our technology and pride, we are just visitors on the surface of a planet that keeps its deepest secrets locked away. They didn't find hell. They found the limit. Now, here's where you decide what kind of person you are. The algorithm is about to recommend you a makeup tutorial, a gaming clip, or a cat video. That's the easy path, the shallow path, or you can dig deeper. If your curiosity isn't satisfied, if you want to know about the other holes humanity has dug into the unknown, the real stories behind history's greatest obsessions, the truths buried under a century of lies, then your next move is simple. Hit subscribe. Prove you're not just a passive consumer. Prove you're one of the few who looks at a rusted cap in the tundra and needs to know why it's there. This channel is for people who chase the truth, no matter how deep it's buried. But if you're content with the surface, if you'd rather just scroll to the next piece of forgettable content, then do us both a favor. Comment "scared to dig" right now and tell me why. Tell me this is too much, that you don't want to know what's really down there. I dare you, because that tells me more about you than 1,000 silent clicks ever could. For everyone else, the drill is still running. Subscribe, hit the bell, and let's keep going down. Content unavailable.